This Athletic podcast is sponsored by Shopify. Now, when you think about companies like Skims or Allbirds, they are selling through the roof. Sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand and brilliant marketing, but often the overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, which makes buying and selling simple. And for millions of businesses, that business is Shopify, because nobody does selling better than Shopify. It's the home of the #1 checkout on the planet, and the not-so-secret secret with ShopPay, it boosts conversions by up to 50%. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell while your customers are scrolling or strolling on the web or in your store, in their feed and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more on Shopify. So upgrade your business to get the same checkouts used by Skims and Allbirds. Sign up right now for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/theathletic, all in lowercase and with no spaces. Upgrade your selling today at shopify.com/theathletic. That's shopify.com/theathletic.
This show is sponsored by Liquid IV. What do you pack in your bag when you're heading out for the day? Sunblock? Snacks? Sunglasses? Well, now there's another essential, Liquid IV. Liquid IV is more than just a drink. It's scientifically formulated to hydrate better than water alone. Visit liquidiv.com and stay fueled for a long day with sugar-free hydration featuring the new Raspberry Lemonade Hydration Multiplier. Get 20% off your first order with the code THERACE at checkout. When I'm travelling, I always like to have a pack of Liquid IV on me to help me stay hydrated when I'm getting on and off planes or going to and from the track. It's important for me because when travelling I am prone to suffering from dehydration and cramp if I don't use Liquid IV. Just one stick and 16 ounces of water hydrates better than water alone. It has 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, plus 8 essential vitamins and nutrients that turn ordinary water into extraordinary hydration. From acai berry and lemon lime to pina colada, there are a wealth of flavours to choose from, and they are always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free and soy-free. So get ready for a long day with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code THERACE at checkout. That's 20% off your first order with code THERACE at liquidiv.com.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THEATHLETIC, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code THEATHLETIC. Make your first deposit of at least $10, place your first bet on any game, and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THEATHLETIC and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and with speculation ongoing about Max Verstappen's future, there's also intrigue surrounding one of the other star performers of 2025, George Russell. So how strong has his start to the year been? And why isn't a new Mercedes deal a foregone conclusion? I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to answer those questions and many more are Ben Anderson and Glenn Freeman. Well, Glenn, we'll come to you first, revelling in the fact this is the first F1 podcast we've recorded in the new studio.
Yeah, in the race's own podcast studio. It's not quite finished yet. I'd say we're maybe at version 0.8 or 0.9 now, but I believe in live testing. So as soon as really the microphones were up and some chairs existed, I've been saying to people, right, let's start doing some podcasts in there and basically see if we can break everything.
Well, Ben Anderson, you've been the test driver of this as well. You are the only person who some of the studio has fallen on the head of. So
that's true. Yeah,
that's something. Have you any ill effects from that? Will we expect even more nonsense?
Well, concussion symptoms can come on much later than advertised, so we'll just have to see how I fare as this podcast progresses.
That's definitely something we will improve in future, even if it means we all have to wear crash helmets or some sort. Something probably we don't want to do for podcasting, but it's a dangerous business sometimes. But yeah, we're quite excited about this studio, and I'm sure we will
very nice
record in it plenty. But let's get on with our main topic, Glenn, because George Russell has had a great start to the year, a couple of podiums in the top 5 every race. Should there be any question mark over his Mercedes future given that form?
In any normal situation, no, there wouldn't be a question mark. I think he's taken the step to being the Mercedes team leader, which really he became last year. He wrestled control of this team from Lewis Hamilton last season. So, and the way he's started this season, now the team is looking to him while Kimi Antonelli's getting up to speed. George is doing everything right. I don't think that car's exceptional, the Mercedes, but I think it's solid, which you probably couldn't say that often about the Merc during this rules package. And George is probably getting the most out of it. The only reason that isn't enough to guarantee him a new deal is because we have the potential for something exceptional to happen in the driver market again, which is the prospect that Max Verstappen might end up on the market. And if that happens and Mercedes has its heart set on continuing to develop Antonelli in-house, then there is a scenario where George loses out. It's harsh, and his performances don't warrant being replaced. But if you offered people a straight choice between Max Verstappen and George Russell, surely most people are saying, I want Max. It's not necessarily a negative reflection on George, just Max is absolutely different level. I feel that, yes, Russell's performances warrant a new deal, but the driver market isn't always fair, is it? Just ask Carlos Sainz.
Yeah, it is an odd situation again. Ben, what would you do if you were Toto Wolff? Would you pursue Verstappen at all costs, or would you think, no, what we've got here is pretty good?
No, I would absolutely pursue him at all costs. You have to. He's the best driver on the grid. I know James Vowles has been saying that he comes with downsides, although he was not very specific about those downsides. You could imagine it's the Verstappen entourage, his dad, the idea that it becomes very Max-centric as a team. But
Helmut Marko, if he comes as part of the package.
Yeah, his attack dog within Red Bull. But, many of the greatest F1 dynasties have been built on a single driver, being the fulcrum of the team. So it's not like it's new to Mercedes either. So I think, yes, you go for Max if he's available. It all hinges on this escape clause he might have in his current Red Bull deal, which is believed to be related to his championship position. So we get to the summer and he's not in the top 2, then he has a decision to make. And if you're Toto, you can afford to wait. If Max becomes available because he makes that decision, you go after him. And Russell's just unlucky that he happens to be in the final year of his contract. But at the same time, he could perform really well. Antonelli might not perform to the level that's expected of him, in which case then Toto might go after Max and George together. So from Toto's point of view, you might as well keep your options open as long as you possibly can, because also it gives you more time to evaluate the driver you're bringing on who's brand new in Formula One.
It's also the fact that Russell doesn't have loads of other options. So all the power sits here with Mercedes, because as harsh as it is, they can kind of say to George, well, we're gonna kind of make you wait, because what are you going to do? You're not going to go and sign for a back half of the grid team just to try and hurry us along. But to pick up on the question you asked Ben there, Ed, about should Mercedes do it, if there's potential for Max Verstappen to be available and Mercedes either don't pursue it or lock themselves out of a situation through their own doing where they could go after him, that would be negligent from Mercedes management to pass that opportunity up, to at least explore it.
In many ways, it's the definition of a good position to be in for Wolff, isn't it? Because,
definitely,
like you say, Russell will be exploring opportunities elsewhere. Drivers in his position have to do that. Him and his management will be asking around. But if he's going to go to Toto Wolff and say, well, if you don't sign me up to a deal now, I'm going to go and sign for Alpine. If you're Toto Wolff, you're going to go, oh no, you're going to sign for Alpine, are you? It's not going to have that leverage because McLaren's full, Ferrari is full.
It's only Red Bull.
Red Bull's only an option if Max goes. So
unless they decide not to stick with Tsunoda and randomly pair the two together.
Yeah, which I don't think Russell
Red
would
Bull
be.
aren't signing Russell to be Verstappen's teammate.
I don't think so, no.
Exactly. So there's not a top alternative for Russell to be in. So it's a strange scenario to be in. And if you flip it round, it's difficult for Russell because he needs to know there's alternatives, doesn't he? And I think he will know no matter how much he kind of lobbies for it or pushes Toto Wolff to sign a new deal with him. It's not going to happen, is it? Until Wolff knows for sure he can't get Verstappen or he does get Verstappen and then says to George, well, sorry, we've got to take this upgrade. What would you do in Russell's shoes, Ben?
I just pray that Toto gives me the contract extension, I think. He's just...
But by extension, that means you're praying that Max stays at Red Bull, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm sure George would be happy to go to Red Bull if that's the only scenario he ends up with. If it turns out that Max is available, does want to leave, does his deal with Mercedes, they decide Antonelli's the future, they've got to stick with him anyway, that they can't afford a couple of seasons where they, farm him out because they want to have the Russell-Verstappen lineup, then Russell's only hope really of a potential top seat is Red Bull. I can't see another drive opening up unless something really untoward happens, like Hamilton decides I'm finished with F1 because I can't drive these cars and suddenly Ferrari are scrambling for a Charles Leclerc teammate, or the McLaren driver situation with Piastri and Norris blows up and Norris, for example, says I've got to get out of here because this is becoming Piastri's team. Then there are some options for Russell, but he's not in control of that. That requires some really quite random situations occurring.
Ultimately, right now, everything that Russell could explore is a plan B. There's nothing that you would even consider jumping to first. You can't force Mercedes' hand with any of the options that are out there. I guess the only way this could backfire on Mercedes, and I don't see this happening, would be if Verstappen went somewhere else, say Aston Martin, and Russell perhaps gets an approach from Red Bull who need a replacement lead driver, and George goes, well, you didn't actually show me that much loyalty in the end. Obviously, you got me to this point, but there was clearly, you were ready to drop me when you thought there was another option. If I was George Russell, I wouldn't leave Mercedes to take the risk of going to Red Bull, but you can, that's the only thing I can see is Max goes somewhere else after Mercedes have pursued him, and then Russell thinks, well, you clearly didn't want me, so I've got this big money offer from Red Bull, I'll go there instead.
I think that would be a petty move though, wouldn't it? You have to kind of separate the business from the sport in this.
It would be an emotional response.
Yeah, and an unwise one, because if Verstappen's leaving Red Bull, you have to say he's leaving partly because he doesn't back that team to do well under the new rule set. So why would George then want to jump into that seat when there's already, even if the rumours aren't to be believed, a huge risk Red Bull is taking doing its own engine. Merck are believed to have the edge on everybody, so you'd be giving up a potential advantage for a seat that the best driver on the grid has decided isn't worth keeping. That doesn't seem like a smart play. It seems like a vindictive play in that scenario.
In a way, it makes Russell's position quite simple. It's just keep doing what you're doing. Perform at a high level. He's been quick in qualifying. He's been putting together very good races.
Apart from Jeddah.
Yeah, but that was primarily tyre-based. He did perhaps overwork them a little bit as well, but that was partly down to circumstances. So even if Jeddah was his worst race, it was still
been good,
perfectly reasonable one. And his pace compared to Antonelli has been very good. Impressive as Antonelli has been as an 18-year-old coming in, Russell is still kind of 2 steps ahead of him on pace at the moment. So I guess that's all Russell can just do. Keep doing what you're doing.
It feels like he's getting the most out of that car. As I said earlier, I don't think this Mercedes has a brilliantly high peak at the moment. Maybe that will come.
I think they would admit that too.
Yeah, but you do just kind of get to the end of the weekend and go, oh yeah, there's George Russell, about where the maximum you would expect a Mercedes to be. It feels like he's delivering in almost every session and across most weekends.
He's bothering the McLarens, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's the only one really doing it apart from Max. So you'd have to put him in probably the top 4. If you were ranking all the drivers now, after just 5 race weekends, Russell would be in your top 4, I think. And that
100%.
That means his performance level has been pretty much as good as could be expected.
Yeah, it's his best season pro rata so far.
Yeah,
Only 5 races. But I think he has taken that step. And that's the thing that I think even if Mercedes were to sign Max Verstappen, they'd be a little bit disappointed to have to lose George Russell. And we are assuming it'd be Russell they'd lose because they've invested so much in him. He's developed and he's kept taking steps. And then you just get to this point where he's a superb driver, but you've just got to take Verstappen. But that's still a logical thing to do. But it's almost like Russell's done everything he needs to do, ticks every box, and he's about to step into that, I can win the championship next year if the car and engine package is as good as it's expected to be. And then suddenly it might all dissolve to nothing.
Do you think Mercedes would ever countenance putting Russell and Verstappen together in a hypothetical scenario? Or do you think that's just too much trouble to invite and you just have to back Antonelli even if he's not performing close enough to Russell's level after this season or by the summer?
It'd be great fun if they did.
It'd be amazing. I feel like they're too committed, or Toto's too committed to the Antonelli is my next Max, that he wouldn't then go, I've got to find somewhere else to farm you off to. And unless Antonelli has a horrendous rest of his season, but I'd say the signs so far that's not going to be the case. You mentioned there, Ben, where Russell would be if you were ranking the drivers at this point. So while you guys were talking, I looked up. Ed, I know you don't like this, but hopefully you'll indulge it for a moment. We on social media do a rankings championship based on handing out the F1 points system for the top 10 based on your driver rankings from each race weekend. So whoever gets number 1 in your rankings get 25 for that weekend, etc., etc. So
the true championship.
Yeah, exactly. We're five rounds in, aren't we? Can you work out, or can you imagine where Russell is in your rankings at the moment based on the F1 points system for the top 10?
I suspect he might be second.
Ben, would you like to guess?
I would say second, yeah.
He is second. So Verstappen leads on 89 points. Russell is on 68.
And then Piastri?
No, Piastri's fourth on 57.
Leclerc,
2 points behind Alex Albon.
Oh, wow. Yeah. He has had a very good
season from Alex Albon. Yeah, well, it's been one of those seasons where his basement's been very, very high. I think that's the thing. That there have been, a couple of weekends you think, he could have qualified a place higher or whatever, or maybe the race could have been managed fractionally better, certainly in Jeddah. So yeah, he's been really impressive this season, I think, Russell. So a difficult decision, but it does come down to fundamentally whether or not Max leaves Red Bull. But I think if he decides to go, it will be to Mercedes, because it just feels a bit early for Aston Martin, doesn't it? I'm not ruling it out, but I'm just not sure Max Verstappen would look at Aston Martin and think, that's the place to be in 26. 27, 28, 29, maybe different.
Yeah, I feel like the raw ingredients are more appealing because he will know better than anyone the magic of Newey and how he can troubleshoot his way through problems, which he's done many, many times with Red Bull. And I'm sure part of the reason they're so stuck now is because they can't go to Adrian and say, even though you're on the beach now, Adrian, could you just fix these problems for us? Plus the Honda element. Honda have powered all of Max's world championships. That's going to be a big draw. But the Aston situation now just looks so bad that it would be a huge punt to go, do you know what? Elbow Fernando Alonso out, I'm going in there. Merc is the safe bet. And if you're Max, you've got so much automatic power in the driver market that you could easily negotiate with Toto a deal whereby you can exit 1, 2, 3 years down the line if you so choose. So that's definitely the sensible route to take.
And of course, Aston Martin could be an escape route for Russell, if he needs one, perhaps.
Life is busy, but often the hardest thing about work is the constant noise and distractions. I sat down to write this ad and a text went ping and an email went ding, and that made me realise I hadn't replied to someone from yesterday, and guess what? I'm going to be late for my next meeting too. Yep, it's more challenging than ever to meet the demands of today's competing priorities without some help. And that's where Grammarly comes in. Grammarly is the essential AI communication assistant that boosts productivity so you can get more of what you need done faster, no matter what or where you're writing. And sure, Grammarly can help with your spelling and grammar, but what I like best is that it works seamlessly in the apps you already use, like Slack, Gmail, Office and Outlook, without any need to copy and paste. In fact, 90% of professionals say Grammarly has saved them time writing and editing their work. So let Grammarly take the busy work off of your plate so you can focus on high-impact work. Download Grammarly for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's GRAMMALRY.com/podcast.
We off?
30 seconds of carefree bliss.
Oof, like wind in your hair carefree.
Oh, like using Clorox disinfecting all-purpose cleaner in the home carefree.
Yes!
Like dog slobbing on the coffee table and cleaning it with Clorox carefree.
He's on a roll now.
Spit toothpaste on the faucet.
You got it. You got it.
Peanut butter on the light switch.
Oh, spritz, spritz.
Spritz, spritz. Clorox, man. Clean feels good.
Okay, we're back.
Use as directed.
Subtle results, still you, but with fewer lines. Botox Cosmetic, out of botulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
Let's look ahead to the Miami Grand Prix now, the scene of McLaren's breakthrough victory last year. Ben, we heard from Lando Norris, his race engineer Will Joseph, and Zach Brown in our last podcast episode. Yeah. Things going well at McLaren. Can you see anyone stopping them in Miami this weekend?
I think it's going to be difficult just because of how hot it is usually in Miami. And that's got to play to the inherent kind of McLaren rear tyre management advantage. There are a couple of drivers who I think have the potential to kind of be disruptors. Obviously, Max Verstappen, he's great at Miami too, but I just feel like there's enough kind of slightly long, awkward corners combined with this temperature element that will make it more difficult for him in the Red Bull. I think Charles Leclerc is very good at this track too, and maybe in the race situation, the Ferrari can be strong, but I just feel like he's inevitably going to qualify maybe fourth at best, just because they're giving away 2 or 3 tenths, it seems, on a Saturday, regardless of where they go. So I think if both McLaren drivers execute and are clean, given how well they can manage the tyres in the race, it's very difficult to look past one of Piastri or Norris winning the race.
And ultimately, they've won 4 out of 5 Grand Prix, and they probably should have won 5 out of 5. So they should be going there expecting to do it. Do you think it makes any difference, Glenn, it being Miami, given that they won there last year? Or do you think they've kind of transcended that point where a good result a year ago lifts them because they're up there every week now?
Yeah, I think that's it. It's not like going back to Monza in 2022, a year on from the kind of the Daniel Ricciardo win in 21 that broke their barren streak. I'm sure they've moved well on. I'm sure from a sort of team, media and content perspective, there'll be lots of, 1 year on, what 12 months it's been. But I even got the impression from the podcast you did at MTC a few days ago, Ed, that nobody's really, the romance of, wasn't it nice when we started this journey 12 months ago? They've moved on from that. They've won a championship since then, and they've got their eyes firmly set on more championships this year.
Yeah, Norris kind of mentioned it'd be nice to go back there because it's got good memories, but he was more focusing on the kind of refresh of the 2-week gap between Jeddah and there, just to try and get his own kind of situation in order, because he's the one that looks a bit shakier. And I would say, even based on last year when he won the race in the upgraded McLaren and Piastri was in the non-upgraded McLaren because they weren't equal with parts at that point, Piastri was the most impressive driver that weekend, certainly the more impressive McLaren driver. So I feel like going into the weekend, there's already a sense with the momentum that Piastri's built up from winning the last 2 races and kind of smash and grabbing a bit against Norris, despite Norris looking quicker at times. Piastri has an edge on this circuit as well. So that's another thing for Norris to kind of have to battle as he tries to kind of get on top of what seems to him to be quite a difficult car this year.
Yeah, it's a good point. Actually, Miami last year was one of Piastri's low-key standout weekends.
Yeah.
I think it was very hard to miss. Well, very easy to miss, rather, that it was that good. But
he looked
really
like he was going to win, but for that collision with Sainz and then the safety car timing and everything else, which helped Norris, didn't didn't help him. So he was low-key excellent considering the spec disadvantage, I think, in the race, qualifying maybe less so.
And inevitably, there's a lot of interest in the Piastri versus Norris dynamic. We've got a few McLaren-related questions in the Race Members Club. I think this is a good time to take them on. Glenn, I know you like this question from Chuck Aoki. There were lots of Mark Webber references on the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix broadcast, given he was the last Aussie to lead the championship. But is Lando Norris actually the Webber in the McLaren situation to Oscar Piastri's Sebastian Vettel?
You're right, Ed. I do like this question. It made me laugh when I saw it come in after the last Grand Prix. So I'm glad we are finally talking about it. I'm not sure Norris is to Piastri what Webber was to Vettel. I don't think the gap between them is quite the same as Webber to Vettel. I don't know if that's the size of the gap, because actually when Webber was comfortable with the car, the actual performance gap between him and Vettel wasn't huge. But I suspect that the hierarchy between Piastri and Norris will never be perhaps as consistent as it was between Webber and Vettel. So they'll be close, but I think they'll be so close that it will still sort of flip-flop between the two of them. I also would say, and this isn't quite what the question was asking, but I'd also say I don't think Piastri is another Vettel. And I don't mean that from a talent point of view. I think his talent is phenomenal. But I think he's less emotional than Vettel. He seems totally unflappable. And I would say even when Vettel was at his brilliant best, you could never quite say that about him.
I don't think there's been a driver as robotic as Piastri as they're running at the front, certainly not for a while. I think he's probably closer to Webber in two quite specific aspects. One being that Lando is the sort of incumbent McLaren driver for a long time, come up through their kind of junior program. So he's much more like Vettel in that sense, whereas Piastri's been bought in. And also he's the one that generally is a bit more impressive in the high-speed corners, I think, which is a trait that used to be present with the Vettel-Webber comparison. Webber was like the guy they trusted with the aero testing at high speed because he was really good in those corners, and Vettel was more a master at the kind of slow-speed stuff. Although I think Piastri is better relative to Norris overall, as Glenn was saying.
Yeah, it depends how you take the question, I think, because I almost leant more towards the more psychological side. Because Webber was interesting, because I always thought, Webber is a very strong character, very strong personality. It's a miracle he got to Formula One at all, let alone that his F1 career lasted longer than that brief initial contract with Minardi. So it took an enormous amount of determination for him to get there. I did sometimes wonder if as a driver, he was a bit like a suspension arm, very strong with loaded one direction, but a little bit brittle sometimes. Others.
Never heard that.
But he was quite shaky, wasn't he?
And maybe just in certain circumstances, and maybe that's where a comparison can be drawn with Lando Norris. Although I think we're still yet to see that fully tested. So there's all sorts of different ways you can take this, and it's interesting that we've all drawn slightly different threads from that question. It just shows any kind of comparing a driver to a driver of yesteryear is objectively meaningless, but subjectively it's just quite interesting to have different frames of reference and different ways to look at both drivers, really.
Yeah, I think trying to interpret what I imagine Chuck meant in the question, I get the impression that the question was suggesting that Norris is going to be a bit perhaps flaky when it comes to the crunch, as Webber was a couple of times. Apologies, Chuck, if that's not what you meant.
It could also be that the car doesn't suit Norris as well as it does Piastri, and there was certainly that element in the Red Bull era of Webber just not being quite as comfortable in the car, developing away from him and more towards
Vettel. The exhaust blowing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that in that way, the comparison is quite accurate.
Yeah, I suspect with a different type of car prevailing, Webber could well have come out on top of that Vettel battle and won many more races and a few championships. Right, Ben, a question from Cyrus Stenstedt. Lando Norris keeps making all of these small and big errors, so Oscar Piastri has to be seen as the title guy in the McLaren camp. If Red Bull gets on the pace, will they start favouring him over Lando Norris if they have to throw their weight behind one?
Well, Red Bull's kind of on the pace anyway, isn't it? Certainly with Verstappen. Certainly on the low day track. Well, he's right there, isn't he, in the Drivers' Championship still? Was it within 20 points, within 12 points or something? Certainly one race win's worth. I sort of still get the impression McLaren don't care that much. I had this feeling last year when Norris had the outside shot that they kind of reluctantly backed him to give it a go because they were focused on the constructors, and I feel like they still are. And if you look at that championship, it's going really well, even with Norris making his tiny or big errors. I kind of feel like they want the Drivers' Championship to just take care of itself. As long as they run each race sensibly and don't make any silly decisions and don't cause one or other of the drivers to get upset with how they operate the race, they don't really mind which one of them comes out on top. Maybe the drivers won't like that, but that feels to me like the way McLaren wants to go racing, and it's paying off for them in the championship that they care about most.
I never really buy into this obsession with when is Team X going to back one of its drivers. I feel like
it's very late 90s, isn't it?
Yeah. I feel like there is. I used the word obsession already. People seem to be constantly looking for it. Sometimes we're constantly looking for it, almost from the start of the season. I think, as you've described there, Ben, I think you let it play out, and if you're in McLaren's situation, you make a decision late in the season if the maths around it allows you to. I agree that I think McLaren know that. I think that's how they're going to play it. I guess the reason it comes up is because we know they're going to be up against a team that is built around one driver in Max Verstappen. You made the 90s comparison. It's a bit like teams being up against Michael Schumacher Ferrari, where you know that there's not going to be that issue. But I do think that it's almost, you said the drivers may not be happy about it, but it's probably accepted within McLaren that that's how they're going to play it. So I don't imagine there are as many conversations inside McLaren about, when are we going to decide which driver to back, as there are outside McLaren, where, even this early in such a long season, people are already wondering like, everyone thought it was going to be Norris, but now they're going to have to back Piastri. And I believe the team when they say that's not on the radar at the moment.
It's also going to take Red Bull developing the car in quite an extraordinary way in a season where nobody really wants to develop their car because they're worried about 2026. So at the moment, it just feels like Max is the outside shot, and he might have a go if the car miraculously turns around, but more than likely it's going to be a 2-horse race between the McLaren drivers at some point mathematically, in which case they'll just go, have at it, boys, as long as we win the Constructors.
Yeah, and I think ultimately maths always dictates it. They're 10 points apart, which isn't much, really. Lando Norris hasn't finished worse than 4th. And I think people have sort of felt Piastri's had a triumphant, perfect start to the season, and Norris has had a disastrous one, which isn't the case at all. It's still a live battle. It's not clear who will come out on top. They might just keep swinging back and forth.
I think they will.
That could well be the case. If you get to a point where you kind of need to commit, not because you kind of have to always, but if one driver falls 70 points behind the other, then you go with the other one, whoever that is. I think there's too much belief that this is always preordained, and it's just not, because results dictate it. Because I'll tell you, Red Bull, if Tsunoda went out and over the next 10 races started obliterating Verstappen, that team would become Tsunoda's team on a dime. It's what happens. That's happened in the past. Obviously, that will not happen, but that tells you it's performance that dictates it. And I don't think performance has got anywhere near dictating which of these two drivers is stronger. It may play out that way, but we're way off that yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, it seems like the whole debate is predicated on this idea that there's another driver and team in a stronger position than they are. Last season when they're trying to chase down Max and Red Bull, there's a better argument for saying, well, this guy's got the best chance, so we have to do it. Maybe McLaren were a bit slow to get on board with that, but we explained why maybe they weren't that bothered. This season, they're starting on the front foot. And although Verstappen's in the mix, he's won a race against the kind of run of play, so he's not really in the fight in the same way. Like, it's McLaren's to control at this point with the car advantage they have. So it's a different dynamic to the one where they had last year that this question seems to be kind of directed at.
We keep mentioning last year, and there was so much talk last year, wasn't there? Why aren't McLaren getting behind Norris? Why aren't they moving Piastri aside? Hungary was the big one, wasn't it? Where they gave Piastri, they let Piastri retake the win that he'd kind of been unlucky. He'd been unlucky to lose the lead, and everyone's saying those points were there for Norris, just give them to him. I always thought that was the right decision because it was so unlikely that Norris was going to catch Verstappen and the potential benefit you would get from Piastri winning that race. And I think we're seeing that now. If you'd taken that win away from Piastri, he may have finished last year with his head down, like down in the dumps. You don't know how he comes into this year. I mean, we've just said he's probably a robot, so it probably didn't make any difference. But I suspect there'll be some feeling within McLaren that they are reaping some of the benefit of not casting Piastri aside last year. And they're going, well, look at him now. He's flying.
Yeah, and it may well be over the next 10 races that Piastri does assert himself and he becomes the one you back. That could very well happen, but it needs to happen first. You can't preempt it, and it may not happen at all. So, yeah, I don't think it's something that will be vexing McLaren, particularly at this stage. A question now from Clive Barker that I'll take. Would Piastri have ever won a race if it wasn't for the Alpine debacle that led to McLaren getting him? Well, he probably wouldn't have by now, because he'd have had 2 years in Alpine, and then maybe someone else would have signed him or he'd moved or whatever. And it's actually quite an interesting question to wonder how the driver market might have changed around. Would Ricciardo have got that last season with McLaren because they couldn't have had an alternative
They get
driver?
Gasly, don't they?
Very possibly, yeah. Although they'd have had to extract Gasly. So, yeah, probably. So it has a knock-on effect. But, yeah, this has definitely been very good for Oscar Piastri's career. And what's quite interesting to ask is how well he'd have done at Alpine and what his performance level would have been and how people would have evaluated him being there alongside Ocon, wouldn't it, rather than Gasly, because Gasly went there to cover the fact they didn't have a driver at quite a bit of expense. So, yeah, very, very good career move for Piastri, you have to say, and a fairly poor move from Alpine not to get him properly under contract. And although Zach Brown did thank Otmar Safnauer for that, Ben, from your work on the Team Principal podcast, Otmar has already said at least once on that podcast that was not his fault because it was done, or the failure to put together the deal properly was before his time and not actually under his jurisdiction.
Yeah, he's definitely not taking ownership of that blot on the Alpine.
Have you sent him Zach's comment yet?
No, I haven't. No.
Please do.
Yeah, we need to
show him on
air for it. I mean, surely Piastri kind of just has the Gasly time at Alpine, doesn't he? Much of a muchness. He obviously doesn't benefit from having that experience, but given the quality of driver he is and the personality he is, it seemed quite clear even before he came into Formula One, the way he talked about the job he had to do as the reserve driver, that he was going to be quite good when he got into F1 and very capable and very switched on. So I kind of feel like he puts himself definitely in a good position in the driver market if he wants to get out before this point. And then it's a toss-up between people like Gasly or maybe Alex Albon who get that Ricciardo McLaren seat. I don't see a scenario where Ricciardo retains that seat. If they're prepared to pay him not to race, they're going to find somebody who's looking more sensible to go in that seat. And then it's whether there are other opportunities knock on from that open up for Piastri. Does he end up in the Red Bull? Say when Perez is finally binned off, does he go in there this year, for example, because he wants to move on from Alpine? But I don't see how he wins a race. As good as the Alpine has become, it hasn't looked like it could win a race. I mean, Vegas with the engine failure for Gasly after he qualified in the top 3. I mean, that was a good weekend, but podium at best, probably.
Yeah, and there's an alternative path for Piastri as well, which would have been gone on loan to Williams for a couple of years.
Oh yeah,
and then replace Alonso. That was the original plan. That's actually right, in the verdict when it went to the Contract Recognitions Board. This was outlined. So it all just points to Alpine making lots of bad decisions, because actually, with how good Oscar Piastri is, they should have just said to Fernando Alonso, look, we rather than just trying to get one more year out of him, they should have said, look, you're at a high level, but we've got this guy, we need to put him in. They tried to kind of have their cake and eat it, and they ended up neither having it nor eating it. Just lots of no cake, which I always think is a terrible situation to be in.
Morning decisions. A creamy mocha frappuccino drink? A sweet vanilla? Maybe a smooth caramel? Or that white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Start your day with bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drinks. Pick up a bottle near you wherever you buy your groceries.
Hey guys, finding the perfect gift for the food lover in your life is easy. Thanks to Goldbelly. Goldbelly ships America's most iconic foods straight from world-famous restaurants right to your door. So if you want to treat someone to Joe's Stone Crab from Miami, Franklin Barbecue from Texas, or desserts from famous foodies like Ina Garten or Martha Stewart, Goldbelly has you covered with free shipping anywhere in the country. Just go to Goldbelly.com and for a limited time, get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT. That's promo code GIFT.
What makes a great pair of glasses? At Warby Parker, it's all the invisible extras without the extra cost. Their designer quality frames start at $95, including prescription lenses, plus scratch-resistant, smudge-resistant, and anti-reflective coatings, and UV protection, and free adjustments for life. To find your next pair of glasses, sunglasses, or contact lenses, or to find the Warby Parker store nearest you, head over to warbyparker.com. That's warbyparker.com.
Right, we'll move on to the final part, which is a selection of questions on various subjects from the Race Members Club. And remember, if you want to join the Race Members Club, you can click the link in the episode description, head to Patreon and search for the race. Loads of extra stuff there. You're always doing stuff with the Race Members Club, Glenn. Do you want to tell them what they get? What do you like? They're fed up of hearing me talking about it.
God, there's so much. I can't even remember everything else that's to come. Loads of stuff from Bring Back V10s, but as I always say when I promote it on Bring Back V10s, loads of stuff from you guys who are covering F1 day to day. You know, lots of, I think the really fun stuff this year has been the little snippets where, you know, when you guys are in Saudi Arabia, you're doing impromptu chats on the bus back to the hotel, just sort of 10, 15 minutes, kind of really informal, recounting what's been going on, and a little video. I think you did a video back at your hotel one night just saying, oh, I just wanted to talk to you about something I saw trackside, all those little bits. So it's not purely, oh, you get an extra 1 hour podcast once a week or anything like that. It's, I love the appetite we have for it and just going, I've had an idea, I'm going to do it for the members club. And then you see the responses all that stuff gets as well. I should say, I don't know the exact release date for this podcast we're recording right now, but during May, so starting from 1 minute past midnight on May the 1st, as May is the month when F1 is celebrating its 75th birthday, we will be running a 75% discount of your first month with us in the members club on Patreon. So if this comes out on the 30th of April, wait a day and then sign up and you can get 75% off your first month.
Perfect month of May. Do the Americans only get it for 2 weeks these days, given the way the Indy schedule is?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm allowed to say month of May in that order. I might get the Indy 500 coming after me.
Much more the 2 weeks of May. But anyway, yeah, we really enjoy the work we do with the Race Members Club, and it's a great community. And yeah, it's great that people seem to enjoy our random witterings that we sometimes
They're
put together.
brilliant, though. The peek behind the curtain stuff is really good. I think the way you guys have ramped that up this year has been really great.
And obviously, every sort of week or so, or every couple of weeks, people get to grill you on everything you've got wrong in your driver rankings that we mentioned earlier.
Yes, yeah, that's always something that happens. So yeah, I do a quick chat with myself.
He's undersold it. That's always something that happens where he doesn't do justice to the process.
But astonishingly, people are quite happy to listen to me wittering to myself for that length of time. And yeah, thanks very much for the feedback and engagement. So it's it's just interesting to get different perspectives, and sometimes agree with feedback saying I'm wrong, sometimes disagree. But yeah, it's become a fun part of the weekend. And of course, the Race Members Club also get question asking privileges on this podcast. So let's pile through these now, Glenn. Nevin Knowles says, are these the worst regulations of the last 30 years?
Wow.
We have yet to have a true title fight. The 2022 regs were supposed to give us competitive racing, but all it has done is breed a single dominant car for each season. And on a related note, Cyrus Stenstead asks if F1 not restricting these technical regulations is a major error, as passes can't happen without a big advantage. This season feels like a qualifying championship now.
Yeah, I agree that it seems to become a qualifying championship. That is a shame. I think Scott Mitchell-Mile maybe used that line recently in a video that we did on YouTube. And when I heard that, I thought, oh, that's a shame. But I do agree.
Fred Vasseur likes to say it too.
Does
Quali
he?
championship is what he continues to call this season. Yeah,
on the point about not restricting these technical regulations, maybe help me out here, Ed. Have I imagined this? Or have the FIA, I assume it would have been Nicholas Tombassis, said, we could have done some stuff to get these regs under control before the end of the cycle, but we chose not to and just focus on 26?
There were some things they could have done and changed because they've learned quite a lot. But there was also pushback from the teams as well because they're worrying about doing the 26 car as well. So there's a bit of everything. I mean, I think, the question asks if they're the worst.
Yeah,
rates,
I'll come to that bit in a minute.
But progress has been made. And as I've said before, you've got to be really careful about just imagining the impossible, because you're never going to make it easy to follow and overtake. And if you have...
Don't say race in a vacuum.
No, I'm not. I wasn't going to go there. That is a good point, yeah. But also, one of the aims of the regulations, one of them was to make the cars more raceable. But they also said one of them was to condense the field. And that's worked. But if you have a field full of cars that are all at a very, very similar pace, then they will tend to drive around in a line. So there's...
See Formula 3 races ad nauseum.
It's a three-dimensional challenge. There's no kind of binary switch, because you change one parameter for the better and actually it can change another parameter for the worse.
Which is what happened even at the start of these rules in 2022, when the cars were closer to this ideal of where they can follow each other better, racing can be better. Drivers in testing were saying, the slipstream effect is worse because we don't have the same amount of air. Yeah, we're not punching the same hole, exactly. So you were already fighting one element that promotes racing with another element that's supposed to promote racing. So I think a good example of the sort of impossible job that F1 has with trying to write the perfect rule set.
Yeah, which can't exist. On the worst rules for 30 years, I don't think that's the case. I would say if you wanted to nominate a set of rules for that, I'd potentially say the previous generation of cars, because I think the logic they were based on was utterly stupid, which was let's make the cars really fast. The obsession was suddenly the cars have got to be fast, and sort of raceability, to use that word, be damned, really. The only decent championship battle season we got with those regs all season long was 2021, and that was thanks to a rule change that hampered Mercedes, who dominated that generation up to then. What I have liked about these current regulations is that teams can't just keep piling downforce on. It's really easy to overstep the mark and then your car falls out of its window, to use the phrase that comes up all the time. Look at Ferrari from the end of 2024. It looked like they'd cracked it. We did those polls during our live podcast that you guys did at the start of the year, where we asked everybody who's going to be world champion. I was collating the results for that while you guys were on stage. Charles Leclerc came out massively ahead. Everyone thought Ferrari have cracked this now. Leclerc's going to be Ferrari's lead driver. We've almost got this like downforce ceiling that the top teams can hit against. And the challenge is actually, can you keep your car optimized? So I like how that has closed things up. And I think the point about dominance is a quirk that Red Bull worked it out before everyone else at the beginning. So, they stole a march, but
they didn't, did they? Because I take issue with that characterization. Ferrari started 2022 with the fastest car. Then Red Bull managed to dominate for a year and a half or 2 years total going to the start of 24. But then McLaren and Ferrari overtook them in 2024.
And I would say,
development race-wise, it's been actually very mixed up.
Yeah, and this picks up on something that Zach Brown said to you, Ed. Yes, McLaren are winning, but the word dominant is almost wrong because it's always close. You can have the same team or the same car keeps winning, but it's close. Is that really dominance? To me, dominance means you're capable of winning by 30 seconds. And I would say, you talked about we've condensed the field. The gaps are tiny everywhere. And I actually think one of the issues is almost that F1 teams are so good now that they almost achieve the maximum all the time. So that can make it look quite predictable. But you look at the gaps, and I think Lando said to you in that interview, Ed, you've only got to make a mistake that costs you half a tenth. And then you can see on the Delta in qualifying, like, oh no, that could be a row on the grid. Like, it's outrageous how close it is. The one problem I have is that we have moved away from what Ben said, which was in 2022, you had the drivers saying, I think there was a race early in 22 where a bunch of the guys said, this is like karting. We're all over the top of each other. We can run really close.
I think it was Jeddah. I think it was Ocon-Alonso battle.
We have lost that. And I think that's the big shame. And the other problem is, when everything else starts to go wrong, you also get exposed by the fact that we don't have really strategic variation at the moment.
The really positive thing is, though, that the 2026 rules have all been built around optimizing and developing this side of the things and not been entirely compromised to accommodate the power unit rules. But that's another topic. Right, Ben, a question from Ryan M. Is Isaac Hadjar an underrated star amongst the rookies?
Is he an underrated star? I guess it depends on what we mean by underrated. If that word is meant to encapsulate, did we expect anything from this guy that Red Bull themselves seem reluctant to promote into Formula One at all, then yes, because he's come in and done a really good job. Regularly been at the front of Class B, behind the top teams. Qualifying particularly, his pace has been strong, even against Tsunoda, who obviously got promoted. The only block there is probably the last race in Jeddah where he qualified behind Lawson. So you wonder if, as Liam Lawson gets more comfortable again, will that greater experience start to show? But I think in terms of expectation, there wasn't much with Hadjar because it's almost like he wasn't meant to be there. So in some ways, the pressure is off compared to, say, drivers like Behrman and Antonelli who've arrived with this big hype around them. They've both performed well too, but probably on balance, Hadjar's performance level has been the most surprising in terms of how high it's been compared to certainly what I thought, given that Red Bull just didn't seem to be talking him up at all last year.
Yeah, they seem to lose a degree of faith in him. He's always been an interesting driver because I felt he could go either way, and he's gone very much a positive way, which is good because that good start can keep, becomes a virtuous circle, doesn't it? And I think it buys you a lot of time if you just have a good start. And that Suzuka performance in particular was just a nice early season, qualify at the front of the midfield, lead the midfield.
On a proper track too.
Exactly.
That's the other thing. I know he had the embarrassing Melbourne warm-up lap crash.
That's forgotten now.
But
though, really,
but to perform as strongly, I think it's better to look at qualifying too with the rookies because, the whole race time management thing is such a long process to learn. And I think Bahrain showed he's inevitably going to make mistakes. Cooking the tyres on the first lap, you just don't recover on a circuit like that. But the qualifying performances have been consistently strong. And at the start on tracks, you just wouldn't know as well. Somewhere like Suzuka, such a proper driver's track, for him to be so strong there, I think that bodes really well.
Well, the next question comes from Chris Abbott. Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari passed on Carlos Sainz for this year. Help me understand how three top teams could miss on this one. Easy answer. Red Bull was scared of putting Sainz in alongside Verstappen in case it annoyed Verstappen, even though Verstappen wasn't that bothered. Mercedes had Sainz on the list, but their priority order was 1 Verstappen, 2 Antonelli, 3 Sainz. So Sainz's availability was the insurance for if Antonelli's TPC, testing a previous cars program, went awry and they thought, oh no, we can't put him in yet. And Ferrari, obviously, the allure of Lewis Hamilton, you can't say that they were wrong to do it because Lewis Hamilton is Lewis Hamilton, but
they were wrong to do it.
It's not looking great.
You might be able to build a case as this season goes on.
So I would say Carlos Sainz, phenomenally unfortunate not to be in one of those top cars because he's a driver who should be who should be at the front, who's proved he can win races.
But he had no power in the driver market. No. It's the same situation as we were talking earlier with Russell finds himself in. It's like you can be on everyone's list, but it's no good if the people whose list you're on are not up to the job. And that's just the unfortunate position he found himself in. Right?
Exactly. But he's made a good choice by going to Williams. Very strong weekend last time out in Saudi Arabia. So he's had his acclimatization, and I think that's a team that, because they underachieved last year, so it looks like they've taken a bigger step this year because they've gone from sort of a little bit lower than they should have been to taking a big stride forward. So you kind of get a compound gain. So I think longer term he could be in a decent position, but yeah, just
he pushes them on, doesn't he? He's the kind of driver that will push Williams on. I think it's already happening.
Exactly, and also probably helping to push Albon on as well because he had a fairly weak teammate for the previous few years. Not in terms of making it easy, but just you need a driver pushing you to show you where you can improve. That's very helpful. Right, Glenn, a question from Adpo. Based on their current position, their in-season developments and the Race 9 regs change, which team do you think is most likely to challenge McLaren for the rest of the season? And the stress is on team in this because we've answered this recently on drivers. But
well, I was going to ask, was it you or Adpo that underlined team and then put stars around it?
I think it was a joint effort, actually. I underlined it. And I think the asterisks were there in the question.
Okay. I don't think there's going to be one challenger. I would say Red Bull's car isn't that bad. It's certainly not as bad as they like to make out it is, at least in Verstappen's hands. I don't think Max is capable of great things, but if that car was as bad as sometimes Red Bull are trying to have us believe, then Max is working absolute miracles that I don't think are possible in modern F1 anymore. So I think they're gonna be there enough of the time. Ferrari have got it wrong at the start of this year, but they have shown, even last year, in season, they've shown they can recover from putting something wrong on the car. So I think they will, at some point, I think they will improve. We talked at the beginning during the George Russell section that this is probably the most consistent Mercedes has ever been in this rule set. They're just not quite, they haven't quite got anything to put on top of that consistency yet. But if they've got something that they finally believe gives them kind of a steady foundation, maybe they will be able to start building and adding performance. So I can see Mercedes going forward as well. So I know the question emphasized pick a team, but I don't think you can.
Oh, do you think? Surely it's Red Bull. Because to me, the Red Bull feels a bit like the 1995 Benetton. It's like Verstappen performing his miracles in a really edgy car. Like you mentioned the window earlier, Glenn. Like it's just the window of the Red Bull is just much narrower than the other cars. And
but will Red Bull be taking McLaren on as a team? They won't be.
They'll need the car to be more of an all-rounder that can work at a Bahrain-like track. So that's the key there.
Yeah.
It's possible, but I'm a little bit wary about their ability to actually unlock that.
Yeah, maybe their development just... The fact they weren't able to improve it much from last year to this year is a concern. But then also Ferrari to have messed it up from the start of the season, that's more worrying than, you bolt this thing on like that's they did in Spain and then you just unpick that. It took them a long time to unpick it, but they did it. They did. When you go into the season with a car that doesn't work, I feel that's more fundamental. So you end up in a situation where maybe nobody can challenge.
I was going to say, the answer is nobody.
Because Merck seem to have already decided, actually, we're going to focus on 2026. We'll bring some small bits, but like this is our car. So, yeah, I think probably the answer is no team.
I also suspect Red Bull need to be careful of just convincing themselves that the TD...
It's all flexi wings, then we'll be fine.
I mean, it may well help, but there's more problems there. I mean, having a flexible front, because it's front wing related for that, does have other benefits beyond just what you can gain from flexing immediately in terms of what balance you can achieve, etc. But it's not going to solve all their problems.
But they are probably the only team in that mix who really, really need to make sure this season goes well to hang on to Max.
Yeah.
So I feel like if one team is going to throw a little bit of the 2026 away to chase this championship...
They could do a 2013, couldn't they? Where they kept developing and everybody else stopped.
I think they're the most likely to do that just because they need Max to be in at least the top two, probably from this contractual point of view. So that's why I pick Red Bull more for that reason than faith they can actually do it without Newey there.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Question now from Karma Strikes for you, Ben. When is the FIA going to clamp down on the My Corner rules lawyering? It's terrible for racing. Piastri was never going to leave Max room and Max was never going to make the corner. Penalise them both. We saw a perfect example of how it's supposed to work when Behrman passed Doohan later in the race. Respectful, clean racing, and it should be the standard, especially at the front.
Well, I take slight issue with the comparison there, only because the Doohan Behrman thing was the sort of opposite of what happened between Piastri and Verstappen, as well as not being for the lead of the race on the first lap. You've got a car sweeping with extra speed round the outside, quite clearly claiming the corner. There wasn't really anything to contest, whereas this is lap one of a qualifying championship race where the guy on pole has messed up the start, so therefore it's absolutely crucial to contest that first corner. I mean, nobody wants all this lawyering of the racing, but we're too far down that rabbit hole now.
And the drivers do ask for it as well, because they want clear,
teams,
consistent, and the fans want consistency, etc., etc. And that's how you try.
This has been forced upon us. Yeah. By any time you feel you're the victim or you've been wronged, you go, we need clear rules. There needs to be a thing that proves that the other guy did something wrong to me. We're so far past the point of just going, just get on with it, let them race, or just trust that whoever the stewards are, that's their decision on the day.
I mean, it's been many, 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 many seasons that we've seen somebody go alongside somebody else into turn 4 in Austria, get forced onto the gravel, and then it's a whole farrago at penalties where they pushed off or not. Like, we're in this now, and I feel like once we're in it, then we just have to get the most rational set of guidelines we can that everybody can understand and work towards. And I feel like the modifications they've made, which seem to be basically, let's stop the Max Verstappen patented dive back into the gap under braking, whether he either releases the brake pressure to be on the inside or make sure he's level on the outside, even if he's lost the position or he's lost the right to the corner. That's been tidied up by this ruling. It seems to have actually been relaxed slightly compared to what we had last year, which is like, microscopic analysis of when you're level, regardless of whether you're attacking or defending. Now it seems a little bit more to what I would call instinctive racing, whereby the guy attacking is kind of, if he's in the right place, has got the right to the corner almost automatically, doesn't have to do this, after you, if the corners combine. Like right from karting, it's a common thing that if you dive past somebody and you make the corner and they're trying to hang around on the outside, you can ease them off the track.
Feed them the grass. That's what it was called.
Feed them the grass. You need to get out of the way. And in the case of Jeddah, Verstappen needed to get out of the way. His corner was lost, and he was just trying a Hail Mary. Can we somehow argue this under the new rules? No, you can't. It was Piastri's corner.
And the reason I disagree with the suggestion of penalising them both is because, it's, as the question says, Max was never going to make the corner. Well, you've got a car that basically can't get into that position, gets into that position by not making the corner. So Piastri can't jump out of the way of that. As I said on the post-race,
he did everything right, didn't he?
Yeah, racing doesn't work if that's not, because you've got two cars sharing a track. There has to be a certain amount of give and take and good sense on it. And that's one of the Verstappen weaknesses, that you'll always kind of go for that. And it's not always going to help him.
Yeah, he's always trying to game the system, isn't he? And the system actually has bit back in a good way this year and boxed him more into a corner. The penalise them both thing, you can't do that, because if you penalise both of them, that's effectively saying don't race the first corner of that one, the most important part of the race at the front.
And Piastri did nothing wrong, because the only way, if you penalise both of them, the only way Piastri could have not been penalised is by jumping over to the left of the track and letting 5 cars past.
Yeah.
That's literally all that can happen. So you're saying if you're leading into turn 1, you've got to drop back because what? And I do think the whole argument on racing's got a bit out of control, because there's some really, it's drifted so far away from the things that have made racing work for a long time. And I do think that in many ways, as it was said, the rules lawyering has caused problems with that. But they're in a reasonable place.
But it's not a new thing either, is it? I mean, the sort of gentlemanly conduct of racing is long since past. And we've talked on Bring Back V10's, a sister podcast, a few times about whether racing was better in the past, and certain incidents reimagined now, they just seem tepid by comparison. But it's been, way back past Schumacher, past Senna, that racing has become this sort of after you. This idea that if someone's quicker than you, you just don't contest the move. That was once a sort of agreed thing among the drivers, because I guess the racing was too dangerous to risk contact, but we're way past that now. It's too safe. The tracks are too safe. So you have to have this kind of micro controlling of the racing, because otherwise without it, you just end up in a situation of constant argument and bitching, basically, about people who feel they've been wronged.
Yeah. And definitely, ultimately, you also need the drivers to buy into it and produce respectful, clean racing. That's something that there needs to be a responsibility on their shoulders as well. And I think as a group, the F1 drivers haven't always lived up to that. I think they've always tried to gain their own advantage, argued whichever side of the coin suits them, and then they're surprised that you get into this sort of situation. Right, the final question from Rob Fuller. With car performance converging, is this season all about having clean air? It's nice if you can get it, ideally if you're up front, but I mean, I think for a long time it's been about having clear air, if possible, because you only maximise the pace of your car if you've got the clear air. So...
And if you're Ferrari, you need clean air and only 19 laps of a race and no more.
Yes, exactly, as China showed. So, yeah, it's about having the clean air, but with the way the strategies are and that kind of thing, the only guaranteed way to find clear air is to be at the front, ultimately, because the gaps aren't big enough for you to find space to drop into, and people will cover you anyway. So, yeah, nice to have, but very, very difficult to find, I think it's
unless you're McLaren.
Safe to say. Well, yeah, good for McLaren, but as Suzuka showed, if you lose it in qualifying, then you could spend an afternoon following around a car that is slower, that's being masterfully driven. Anyway, thank you very much for those questions. Thanks to Ben and Glenn for your answers. We're going to be heading off to Miami imminently, so stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.
The Athletic.